Hi, Dad. Welcome back to another session of Dave and Andy's Honest About Life. How are you?
I'm doing well, Andy. I hope you're well, and I hope your family's doing well.
Everybody's well. Everybody's well. You know, the weather's lovely, the sun is out, and I know that's the case for you all this week. You're finally going to get some warm temps.
Yeah, I can say that right now it's 57, but I think we had 66 yesterday on Easter Sunday. And I believe we're going to get close to 70 or lower 70s today. And then we could hit 80 on Wednesday or lower 80s on Wednesday. So, yeah, spring has sprung. The unfortunate thing is we're all preparing for flooding. Some of the highest water content that feeds into the St. Croix River, which also feeds into the Mississippi, that is some of the highest content of water still left in the snowpack that's up there in northwestern Wisconsin and eastern Minnesota in history, at least in recorded history that we know of. That's a very large amount of water. And if it all melts here in a week, which it might, all melts at once, and then get some thunderstorms or something on top of that, it could be, very bad flooding.
When you say bad flooding, does it start at a certain area south and then go south from there, or is it bad from north
It's a,
on
you're
down?
absolutely right. It's a crest that we follow. We follow where the crest is, and I believe, at the very head of the Mississippi up there in Bemidji, those areas are not going to be that bad. But then as it goes down, as the crest goes down river, it rises, and that crest, by the time it gets to like St. Paul, is going to be high. The way it looks right now, unless something miraculous happens where it starts to thaw and freeze, but it looks like we're going to have a week above freezing, even at night, which is just the worst, and then get a little rain on top of that. So that crest does rise as it goes down, and it looks like some of the worst flooding in recent years in southeastern Minnesota, some of the Zumbro River, some of those other smaller rivers that feed in to the Mississippi at that point, and then going down through eastern Iowa, northeastern portions of Missouri. They're really kind of worried about it this year because I think that crest will be really high by then.
Yeah, and they're talking about flooding all over the place. And you think about these poor farmers, that if it's not drought, it's just too much water,
Yeah,
how do you prepare if you're a farmer?
yeah, a lot of cases you can't. They've tried to prepare by irrigation that they have and different ways of getting rid of the water with great big culverts. But boy, it gets to a certain point where it gets overwhelmed. The whole system that they have gets overwhelmed by how much water is going to be there. And I'm afraid that that's the way it looks right now because of this rapid thaw that we're going to have. And then also it looks like the potential later next week to have some thunderstorms on top of that water that's going to be from the melt. So yeah, there's a lot of things to be watching. And as you said, farmland gets covered up. Southwestern Minnesota, the Minnesota River is going to be extremely high. And the farmland around that area just gets flooded, and it sets the farmers behind. So we may be in a situation where we don't need this year. We don't need this any year, but it could set us behind as far as the planting goes. And then the actual growth cycle, growth season, the harvest could be delayed this year as well.
So as I listen to you talk about this, I often think, you're putting yourself out there, you're forecasting, you're estimating, you're trying to prepare folks and protect them in many cases. And the thing that's different about what you do and others like you is you are capturing your thoughts, your concerns, your estimations, your forecasting on video for folks to go back and review after the time has passed. Do you think about that? Do you think about, what you're saying and how this could be? Have you found a way to qualify it so that it's not like, hey, you were wrong with this? You
Yeah,
follow that one?
exactly. I follow you exactly, and that's something that we have to deal with, and that I had to deal with at the end of my career. In the beginning of my career, there weren't all the recordings and stuff that you can get so easily now, and actually look back, to the exact date when I said something. So now you have to be cautious and say, because we don't know, and I've always said that I don't know for sure. I just say it looks like it's going to be a certain way, or it appears as though we're going to have, a fairly rapid melt and some rainfall on top of that, and that could lead to some bad flooding. Could. you got to have all these, qualifiers in there because we don't know, so as much as we think we know, we don't know. And that's the point that I hope that people listening to this will understand that, okay, he's giving us his opinion and it's just an opinion at this point. I like to think that it's an educated opinion because I have been through this many, many years in doing the weather, but it's still just my opinion. And, I'll be wrong. I'll be wrong. I might be right sometimes, but I'm definitely going to be wrong times as well.
One of the things that I've probably chatted with you about in the past is this idea that, so when you're giving the weather to, or forecasting the weather on TV to a large market like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding 7 counties, or whoever, you even probably know how many individuals that represents. But we talk about, you have to give a broad forecast, temperature, precipitation, for the entire area. And the challenges with TV are that you're giving it to a broad audience that cover a large geographic area. So people say, well, you were wrong most of the time because you couldn't zoom in and say, at this area at this time, which you probably have the technology to do, and you did at the time. You just didn't have the time to go and say that, in each individual city, this is what you expect it to be. Do you see the challenges? I mean, did you hear those challenges? Feel that?
Absolutely, absolutely, Andy. That is the challenge as time has gone on. I always say, people come to me and they say, yeah, your forecasting has gotten worse over the last few years. That's because we were trying to be more specific with our forecasts. I remember when I began, I like to bring up this as an example. We'd say heavy snow is 4 inches or more. 4 inches or more, heavy snow warning. We put out a heavy snow. We got 8 inches, we were right. Said 4 inches or more. That's the difference. Now we have to say, in St. Paul, there's going to be 6 inches. In Minneapolis, there's going to be 5. In Fridley, there's going to be 4. We have to be more specific. So it appears as though the forecasts have gotten less accurate with time because they're more specific. But in reality, our forecasts have gotten much better, much, much better with time because we have been able to be more specific. There's much more information going into the computer programs that make up our forecasting, and that information is more quality information. So the ability for us to be a little bit more specific has changed with time.
And you and I think in one of the videos that we've done, I shared with you that the challenges that they have out here on the East Coast are the west and the east side of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the parts of Appalachian Mountains, et cetera, where you can see the big storm coming from the west. But when it comes to forecasting, what that's going to do is it goes over the mountain and gets to the eastern side. They are challenged, to say the least, to say this thing's going to hold together and continue to drop rain as it goes over the mountain range and comes into the east. And I feel for them because it looks bad, but then it just dries up.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's called the rain shadow. There's a rain shadow on the Rockies. There's a rain shadow in the Appalachians. It's because most of our weather goes from west to east. We're in the westerlies here in the United States. So most of the weather travels from west to east. Down in the far south, southern part of the Caribbean, or southern part of the United States, even southern, like Key West, that's sort of in that area where a lot of the weather travels from east and moves west. Well, most of the country west to east. And if that's the case, then the east side of those mountain ranges are the shadow effect. They get most of the rain as it lifts up, gets dumped out on the west side. And then on the east side, there's nothing left. But the one thing that you do have on the east side is when there's a counterclockwise storm, like a nor'easter or a hurricane coming up the East Coast, that counterclockwise flow makes that moisture come in from the Atlantic and gets dumped on the east side. So in that case, the east side would get more. So there are a lot of things that people that forecast there in the east, as you said, have to deal with, more so than anywhere else in the country, because they have to deal with the westerly storms, but they also have to deal with the nor'easters and deal with the hurricanes. Interesting,
because I don't think I've really given it much thought, but you think about the hurricanes that come in from the east, and they do over Cuba and and Haiti and some of those islands down there. You're right; it's coming from east to west, and then as it gets up to the Keys and into the Gulf of Mexico, then it starts to turn west northwest, and then that explains. You know, you never think about that line that differentiates between the westerlies and the easterlies.
Yeah, it's a muddled line. It's not a definite line, but it's definitely a zone that changes for each storm, basically. But it is definitely a zone that you have to look at, especially if you're forecasting. So that's why a lot of the forecast paths, when you see a hurricane paths in the past, it looks like spaghetti, but they're coming in from the east, and then all of a sudden they curve as they hit the United States or hit, you know, somewhere around the United States like Florida, and they curve up the eastern seaboard. That's the majority of time. It's not all the time, but that happened many, many times.
Oh, interesting. We could go on all day, Dad, about this.
Yeah.
In the next session, let's continue this a little bit with AI, artificial intelligence, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that. So for this session, thank you, Dad. Wonderful to see you.
Good to see you too, pal. Thank you very much. Love you, as always.
Love you. Bye now.